Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today, agreeing to have this conversation together, as I know you do in your personal and professional lives. I want to start with foreign policy, but I want to do that in the context of something that's happened domestically here, what authorities in Boulder are calling a terror attack. This was reportedly aimed at a group who is commemorating the hostages who remain in Gaza. Authorities say the suspect began throwing Molotov cocktails. At least 8 people we now have suffered severe injuries. The suspect was allegedly yelling, "Free Palestine." This follows the murder of 2 young staffers of the Israeli embassy in Washington. And also, your own governor came under attack, Governor Shapiro. I'll start with you, Senator McCormick. How worried are you about the growth of anti-Semitism in these attacks?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us here today, Shannon. Thank you for Senator Fetterman for joining me here. You know, this is something that I'm terribly worried about. The growth of anti-Semitism here in our country is something I know Senator Fetterman and I share. After October 7th, I went to Israel. My wife and I went to Israel and sort of saw firsthand the horrific evil that had taken place on that day. But the thing that was most surprising was what we started to see on our nation's campuses, where you started to see these huge rallies and this anti-Semitism hatred really spewed at places like University of Pennsylvania and others. I actually went to University of Pennsylvania, saw these demonstrations. And this wasn't free speech. This was intimidation, in some cases physical violence. A person that was on my campaign was attacked because he had a McCormick hat and he had an Israel flag. And we see this deeply seated in our society. And it's something that we have to stand up against with complete moral clarity. It's something that we have to push back on. It's something we have to require and mandate that our institutions extricate themselves of anti-Semitism. And it's something that you can't have it both ways. You have to stand up with complete strength. And even during the campaign, when I was obviously running as a Republican and Senator Fetterman was supporting Senator Casey, he consistently spoke out with moral clarity. And I think the most important thing we can have is our public officials pushing, our leaders across our institutions pushing and demanding that we get rid of anti-Semitism.
And Senator Fetterman, you've been an unequivocal voice on that.
Yeah, well, I think you can confirm this. The first time you and I met was the 5th anniversary of the Tree of Life massacre. Yeah. He lives in Squirrel Hill, where the congregation is, and then we met there. And that, for me, that really just brought it home. I remember when that massacre happened in 2018, when I was campaigning for lieutenant governor. And now here we are now, and what happened yesterday in Boulder, it's astonishing, the kinds of the rank anti-Semitism out of control, and for me, and as my friend just pointed out, this is just rampant across all the universities, for all these places too. I mean, we really need to call it what it is. And for me, politically, being very, very firmly side on Israel, that kind of put parts of my party at odds for that. And I just want to continue. And I think we need to deliver a legislative solution too, and really address anti-Semitism and just call it what it is. How? And now there's more this kinds of rhetoric, online and universities and in public spaces. I have people following me and screaming "Free Palestine" and "Genocide John," and that's been now going on for 18 months. And now that's a small thing. I can't imagine how members of the Jewish community must feel constantly under assault. At the 10/7 anniversary, I visited Penn at Hillel, and with 300 students, and they were all it's like they're exhausted, and we're constantly living under this constant kinds of criticism and having that they're right in their face. That's not free speech. Building tent cities on a campus and terrorizing and intimidating Jewish students, that's not free speech. And now we've lost the argument in parts of my party. And for me, that moral clarity, it's really firmly on Israel. And of course, we can all agree the tragedy in Gaza, nobody wants that. But who does want that? And that's Hamas. And if you have been troubled as I am, the death and the misery, I think we should blame Iran and Hamas, and other people blame Israel. I refuse to try to turn Israel into a pariah state, and now it's right in the middle of that. And I think this is one of the things that I think we're very firmly on the same side on.
So all of this is playing out here and abroad amidst talks about trying to bring the operations in Gaza to an end to get the hostages home. Senator McCormick, how do we get the hostages home? Because Steve Witkoff, special envoy, has put out a deal with the U.S. helping to broker between the two. He said the response from Hamas was totally unacceptable and just moves us backwards. It doesn't sound like there's progress.
Yeah, I just came back, as you know, 2 days ago from a trip to the Middle East and to Israel in particular. And there's two things that has to happen at the same time. There needs to be constant pressure on Hamas to destroy the military capability of Hamas. And, if you're standing there, you can't live 600 meters away from people who want to slit your throat in the middle of the night. So that pressure needs to continue. At the same time, we need to, and Israel needs to, working with the United States and others, ensure that the humanitarian aid is available and finds itself to innocent women and children in Gaza. And there's an effort underway with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to do that. And the key is Hamas is very complicated because Hamas has been essentially using the aid as a source of revenue to pay its fighters, as a source of manipulation of the society. So you have to get the food and the water and the aid directly in the hands of the families. And that's what that effort's trying to do. It's made good success, good progress in the last few days. There's obviously been some turmoil around it too, but the idea is to get the food in the hands. So ideally get the food and the aid in the hands of the innocents, keep pressure on Hamas. And that's what that deal, was meant to do. That was an ability. I mean, if you want to fix the hostage problem, Hamas needs to give up the hostages and bring them home, both those that are living and those that are dead. I was hopeful that the deal Steve Witkoff had put on the table was going to do that. And the only way I think to push towards a deal is to continue to keep the pressure on Hamas while at the same time giving aid to those who need it.
And Senator Fetterman, you invoke Iran, which obviously is behind many of these proxy groups causing the real trouble and death and destruction. These are terror groups in the Middle East. There are questions now about whether Israel's potentially gearing up for its own strike in the midst of all of these different talks. You've said when it comes to Iran's nuclear facilities, and I quote from the Washington Free Beacon, waste that bleep. Do you worry about sparking a broader incursion there in the region?
No, I mean, that was deliberately kind of provocative. My latest thoughts on that was much more
colorful.
Basically, I think I'm the only member of my caucus to realize that I think we have an opportunity to destroy that nuclear facility for that. And now I know some of the Republicans we disagree, or maybe privately might agree as well too. But I'd like to remind people that the only reason we're in an opportunity to destroy that facility, and now they've been very clear in what that recent report just confirmed, they're actively enriching uranium now. They're at 60%. They have, I think, 900 pounds perhaps of that, and it's a short step to get 90%, and that's weapons grade of a weapon. So now what's made this possible is because what Israel did, Israel pushed through all the kinds of demands for a ceasefire back last year, and they pushed through that. And what they did, they've destroyed and broke Hamas largely, and then also Hezbollah too. After the beepers blew off, I love it. And then now that broke Hezbollah too, and those proxies now were not part of in fact anymore. And now Iran attacked Israel, and it's very clear they lack the capabilities to really project that kinds of, and then Israel struck back and destroyed the batteries that protect the nuclear facilities, and they also hit the nuclear lab as well too. So now Israel understands that we have a window here to attack that. I think, I wasn't really kind of allowed to disagree politically with the original agreement on Iran. But now, definitely, and I really do think now, Trump did the right thing to break that agreement. And now, for me, we can't really negotiate, I think, with Iran. And now, because of Hezbollah and Hamas, and those are really not really effective anymore, and Iran is actually open, I think it's a once in a generation to destroy that facility. And I think that would transform the region once that's finally destroyed. So stop pretending that's really what Iran is really only about, trying to weaponize and create a nuclear weapon, and that's absolutely unacceptable. And another of the kinds of also change too. Now Syria now has an opportunity to move forward again. And now for me, some of the things that were done, say like when Trump changed the embassy to Jerusalem, people thought the region was going to burn. I mean, none of that happened, a lot of that. So good things have happened there, but right now that's where we're at, and that's absolutely put me, really the only one left in the Democratic caucus, talking and these kinds of a thing.
Okay, so both of you also, another place you found agreement is on this sanctions package that you're considering in the Senate with regard to Russia. There are talks going on there, and as we watch for those, there's a hesitation, it seems a little bit, by Senate leadership to say, let's wait and see what the White House wants to do on the sanctions package. Senator Fetterman, why are you for it?
Well, I absolutely, that war it's not sustainable. And I also absolutely strenuously disagree that Ukraine was the aggressor and they started this war. I don't believe that. When I grew up, Russia was always the evil empire, and that hasn't changed. So now I never thought that they were going to have an easy, quick path to peace, and that's here we are. So now Russia continues to kill innocent civilians in Ukraine. And now here we are. So we have to sanction them and hold Russia accountable. And now I'm a member of the minority. I understand the way this works. So I'm not dropping a lot of cheap heat and attacking people that have different views. But I am firmly on the side for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan through, because it's part of the global struggle and standing for democracy. And that's always going to be the side I'm going to remain.
So, Senator McCormick, as we wait that signal from the president from the White House on the sanctions package, at what point do you think the president's patience with Vladimir Putin is going to wear out?
Well, just a word on Iran, and then I'll talk about it. But on Iran, I agree completely with Senator Fetterman in the following way. Iran's explicit goal, it says it publicly, is to destroy Israel and to destroy the great Satan, which is the United States. So that's why when you talk about a nuclear-armed Iran, we should all have deep reservations about that. And so that's just an unacceptable outcome. And President Trump has said any deal would have to have complete dismantlement of the nuclear program and no enrichment. And so I agree with the senator that we cannot have a nuclear-armed Iran, and that if there's going to be a deal, it has to include a dismantlement. If there's no deal, then we can't have a nuclear-armed Iran. And that means we're going to have to take whatever action is necessary with Israel. We also, I agree with the senator, need to eliminate these terrorist proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and there's been huge progress made based on what Israel has done thus far. With regard to Russia, listen. This is a conflict that has to come to an end. President Trump campaigned on that. To be partisan for a minute, I don't think we would have been in this situation had we not had the Biden administration and the mixed signaling, the withdrawal of Afghanistan, the very weak signaling on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. All of these things, I think, gave a green light to Putin to go into Ukraine. That didn't happen under the first Trump term. I don't think it would have happened under a second Trump term. But now we got to bring the conflict to an end. And there's enormous killing, enormous economic damage. The deal that is on the table is the notion that the Europeans would step up and actually pay a much bigger burden of the defense of Ukraine. We have to give Ukraine confidence that their sovereignty is going to be protected in the future. I agree with the senator. Russia is the aggressor. And if you're Ukraine, you're worried that they come at it again, 2 or 3 years from now. So you have to guarantee. I think this economic idea of joint, the agreement we have with Ukraine to help pay for what U.S. support has given, but more than that, align our economic interests. That's a further deterrent to Russia. So that's the deal on the table, and I thought there'd be progress on that. And Putin seems to be now pulling back from it. And the only way I think to keep the pressure on is for things to happen like what happened today with Ukraine having a very successful military capability and operation. But in addition to that, the kinds of sanctions that are proposed in this legislation, and that is meant to help President Trump deliver on the vision and the deal that he's talked about.
So a lot of agreement there.
Can I just say, respond? I thought it was entirely appropriate to discuss the rare earth minerals too with the Ukraine. Yeah. And now it's very clear China is like holding the monopoly for those things, and we absolutely need those kinds of critical things. That's part of like the new economy. So I think that's reasonable too. Just because it might come from the White House right now, that doesn't mean I'm going to absolutely oppose that or just describe that as something terrible too. And also he brought up Europe paying its fair share. That's reasonable as well too. For that, it's all part of a collective thing to keep Russia in check for that. So that's part of the thing. Just because it comes again, that's part of the bipartisanship where it's getting more and more kinds of punitive to just agree with some of these things in the middle of the part right now.
So a lot of agreement on foreign policy. Let's turn to some domestic issues as well. So President Trump was in Pennsylvania on Friday, celebrating the deal between Nippon and U.S. Steel. Senator McCormick, you supported it and fought for it the whole way. Senator Fetterman, you were opposed to the deal as it originally stood when President Biden rejected it. Are you happy with the changes since then?
Well, where on that? I think that the history, it all started. And I think my friend could confirm I live directly across the street from the iconic steel mill. And that's where it all started. Like, I read that, actually a staffer pointed out that U.S. Steel just announced that they've sold themselves to Nippon. And I'm like, that's wild, that's crazy. They never brought us, they never told me that's coming. And that moment, that was an absolute death sentence to the union workers in the region. I mean, that steel way of life has been in the region since 1875. And I actually just went up on my roof and I made the promise I'm going to work with the White House to jam this up. And we need to demand a fair deal throughout this. And that happened. And then the President Biden did that. And absolutely, I happily agree with what Trump has did as well, too, to keep pushing back and jamming it up. And now we have a deal now. $14 billion and a lot of more kinds of investments. For me, I think we can agree. It's all about protecting the way of life for these union workers here, and the 1,000 people and the billions of those kinds of investment in America. I can absolutely salute those and celebrate those things. I sure hope that all of these things where we've gone, but I'd like to remind people originally when it started back in, I think that was December of 2023, that was a death sentence to that entire region for that way of life. And now what I hope, what was announced when the president visited to announce, that's part about protecting that way of life and billions of investments in America. And I've always believed that steel is a national security, and that's why I'm hopeful.
So the Steelworkers Union says this: our core concerns about Nippon Steel, a foreign-owned corporation with a documented history of violating U.S. trade laws, remain as strong and valid today as ever. And Senator McCormick, we talked about this yesterday, that a lot of the union workers were there on the stage. They were supporting this, but the leadership seems to still have grave concerns.
Yeah, I'm still puzzled by that. I mean, the workers, the 4,000 steel workers in the Mon Valley are for this deal. And, those were folks that supported Trump during the campaign. They, in the Latrobe rally or the Pittsburgh rally, I mean, I sat with those guys. They're like, we got to do this. And I said, hey, listen, if I win, the first thing I'm going to do is have sit down with you guys. Literally the first meeting I had as a senator was a lunch with the 3 locals in the Mon Valley. And so let's, first of all, Senator Fetterman and I, we're not trying to solve all the problems for just the country. We're focused on Pennsylvania. And the Mon Valley is the heart of steel country. And so supporting that was critical. But the senator's right. I mean, the deal that was on the table is a dramatically different deal than the deal that's happened now, which as he said, offers $14 billion of new investment in domestic steel, saves the jobs, makes U.S. Steel, still headquartered in Pittsburgh, a U.S. managed company, a U.S. board, and so forth. With the way the deal's progressed, I don't know what the answer is. The thing I'm sure about is that this is great for the steel workers. This is great for the steel industry in Pennsylvania and across the country. And it's great for our national security because we're going to have state-of-the-art technology in our steel. And it's good for Nippon, too, because they got access to the U.S. market. The deal wouldn't have happened under Biden. It did happen under President Trump because he kept pushing and prodding and getting it to the point where he was comfortable.
So sticking with these economic issues, you got to follow up.
Protecting that way of life. I mean, that's very, very critical. And now there was some disagreement. You know, a lot of the local union members, they really want this because I just want to protect my job. And then sometimes that, you know, I think both of us have been following the union through this. And now here we are. It was really, I think Nippon regrets trusting U.S. Steel's judgment and their advice when they originally announced this, and they were held accountable and to make these kinds of $14 billion of investments, and that's where we are. And now we never turned it into a political football. It's like we were fighting for a win to defend that way of life for Pennsylvania and for America.
Yeah, we sat down within the week or two after I got elected. We talked about a bunch of things. There's a number of things we agreed on. We had both taken different positions on this, but we agreed the most important thing were the workers in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of things we would disagree on too, but the things we agreed on was we got to keep those jobs in Western Pennsylvania. And so we're looking for ways to find common ground. And when we disagree, we disagree. But when we can agree, we agree.
Something you may disagree on is the big, beautiful bill, which is now sitting in the Senate. You're not going to agree on everything. That's certainly one of those things
Right.
you probably don't. But more than a partisanship issue, I mean, it's the GOP, now Senator McCormick, that's got to get together on things like spending cuts, Medicaid potential cuts there, and raising the debt ceiling. And you've got a really narrow margin to get this through. So how does the GOP, publicly, privately, work out some very real debates that could tank that bill?
Well, listen, this is, for this is a once in a generation opportunity in the sense that we're in a process called reconciliation, where the Republicans have the majority in the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so the first thing is that we've got to make permanent the tax cuts. Those are pro-growth tax policy. If you don't make permanent the tax cuts, you raise taxes pretty significant. A family of $50,000 gets a tax raise of $2,500. That's a big deal for a family that's making $50,000 a year. So making the tax cuts permanent is part of the growth. And we've got to, as President Trump campaigned on, strengthen the border. We've got to plus up our defense because of all the things we were talking about in foreign policy. And we've got to find a way to pay for it and at least show that we can begin to reduce the cost of government. Right now, we have a $37 trillion debt. We have a $2 trillion deficit. We bring in about $6 trillion of revenue, and we spend $6 trillion a year, and we bring in about $4 trillion of revenue. So it's like you make $100,000 a year, you spend $150,000. So we've got to begin to show that we can reduce the cost, and I think that's where the big challenge is. So the House came out with a bill that made a step in that direction. I think when it comes to the Senate, we're going to try to find ways to further reduce the cost of government. And only in Washington does further reduce the cost of government mean slowing the growth of the cost of government. And I think that's where the debate's going to be: is how do we pay for these things, but also take some further reductions in the growth of spending.
Senator Fetterman.
And that's the debate. And I think that you're going to find me and others in the Senate pushing to do that. And the reason to push, it's easy to spend, just keep spending, but it's just stealing from the future of our kids, and it's unsustainable to be on this path of reckless spending. And I will say I think it got much worse under President Biden, but this is a problem that both parties over decades, in the last 10 years in particular, have really let spending get out of control. COVID made it a lot worse. We need to bring that spending back in check.
Senator Fetterman, are we wrong to assume you're a no vote?
Well, yeah, I'm a no for a couple reasons. One, I don't think I'd ever be in a position to support cutting Medicaid. And then another thing that I'm troubled by is the cuts to SNAP. Like I'm a member of the Ag Committee, and my wife has dedicated her professional life about food insecurity, and I see this. And my wife spends multiple days a week just feeding people, and I see people standing in lines for food. It's not because they just want some free stuff. It's just because they don't have enough to eat, and that's a real thing. And I don't think that's an appropriate target in the middle of all of those things. That doesn't. Another thing that I'm troubled that he brought up also is our national debt approaching $37 trillion. That's a lot. I mean, there was that joke or that quote. It's like, hey, now after a couple billions, that might matter sometime. And now we're talking $37 trillion. And now that's a significant danger for our nation's future, honestly, as well. But if I had to find something in that, the big, beautiful bill that I could support that, and that's a mistake that our party made, and that's the border. I absolutely support those kinds of investment to make our border security as well now, too. Our party, that's when I've lost some support in my party, that I thought the border was really important. And our party did not handle the border appropriately. Look at the numbers. 267,000, 300,000 people showing up at our border. And, we can all agree that's roughly the size of Pittsburgh. Now, that's unacceptable, and that's national security issue, and that's chaos. So a secure border, being very pro-immigration, that's as I am as a Democrat. It's like trying to think two things must be true, and sometimes that's put me at the odds of my party and my base to assume that I've changed my values, and that's never changed. That's never changed. Two things must be true, because we can't pretend that we can take care of if there's 300,000 people showing up every month, not once a year, every month. And that's a truth and it was appropriate. And now trying to find a way forward when we both represent the most purple part of America, and now during the middle of all of it, it's like we are going to disagree and vote on different things, but for me, it's about trying to find the things we can win together and deliver those kinds of wins for Pennsylvania and then ultimately for America.
So let's talk about your work together in Washington on a number of issues and about the way that you're doing your job.
Can I make a comment on that, Shannon?
Sure.
Just briefly. So first of all, I heard him say that during the campaign about Pittsburgh comes in every month. But if you look at the numbers, it's true. But just over the last 4 years of the Biden administration, we added Pennsylvania, which has 13 million people. We added that in terms of illegal immigrants coming into our country. So that is the magnitude of what happened. I know you're looking for disagreement. There's one area I think we disagree on, and the senator just said it. But listen, we agree that we should not take benefits away from vulnerable people. So I'm not advocating in Medicaid that we cut benefits from the people for whom the program was designed. But what's happened, and you got to step back and look at it, is Medicaid spending has grown by $250 billion a year in 5 years. It's the fastest growing line in the budget, the fastest growing entitlement. SNAP's grown by $80 billion in the last 5 years. Part of the reason those programs have grown is that there's people taking advantage of those programs that the programs weren't designed for. Those are working age men without dependents, and those are illegal immigrants in a number of cases. So what I'm arguing for is that we need to cut out the use of those programs to make them viable by people for whom they weren't designed. Now, of course, the risk is in reducing those costs, you hurt the vulnerable people. And so I think we probably share the goal that we don't want to hurt vulnerable. I certainly don't want to. I know the senator does.
Of course, yeah. And it's just like, that's the thing. I'm not going to call people names or call people fascist or that we want people to die. I refuse to engage in that kind of a rhetoric. That's not going to make this conversation any better. And that's going to get more and more in that kinds of rhetoric. I just don't want to participate in it. I've lost the taste to engage in pointless kinds of fighting. But now, for me, and there's also other truths embedded in that as well, too. There is fraud and waste in Medicaid and in SNAP. We can make them more efficient. Absolutely, we should do those kinds of a thing. And now we probably will vote differently on the big, beautiful bill. But that doesn't make him terrible if he votes for yes, and it doesn't make me, terrible either if I vote no on that things. And it's like, that's the way democracy works, and put us in the minority. And that's where we are. And for me, I'm going to firmly remain trying to find a work together and agree to disagree. And the vote will reflect where my values really are.
Well, you all have built a friendship outside of what you're doing professionally, personally as well. Senator McCormick, you've come to Senate Fetterman's defense in a number of recent articles that have had questions about how he's doing his job. The Philadelphia Inquirer had a piece this weekend Not questioning your ability, Senator Fetterman, to do the job, but your desire or willingness to do it. I covered your campaign. I saw how hard you fought to win this position. How do you answer these calls by the Philadelphia Inquirer for you to be more engaged in showing up to represent your constituents in Pennsylvania and questioning whether you have the desire to continue doing so?
Oh, well, no, for me, it's very clear. It's just part of like this weird smear, this thing. And now the things where I started to kind of, be following Israel or the border, and now really refusing to vote to shut the government down, I've continued to get more and more kinds of incoming and those things. And now all of those things. So the more kinds of left kind of media continues to have these kinds of an attack, and it's just part of a smear, and that's just not it's just not accurate. And we move on, and why we're still having this conversation. Why at this point? I'm here, I'm doing that job, I'm defending on all those things and all of those important votes. I've always been there. And for me, if I miss some of those votes, I've made 90% of them. And we all know those votes that I've missed were on Monday. Those are travel days. And I have 3 young kids, and those are throwaway procedural votes that they were never determined if they were important. That's a choice that I made. And if you want to attack me for that, go ahead. But I'd like to point out that, Bernie and Senator Murray missed more. So why aren't the left media yelling and demanding them and claiming they're not doing their job and those kind of a thing? Just be genuine on that. And, of course, he did defend me through that. And he actually asked me, it's like, is it okay to defend you? I don't want that to create more political problems.
Thought it might hurt him.
Yeah, he did. And I'm like, no, I appreciate that. He and people recognize the smear in this process of this. Now, I've spent two days in Cambridge, one of the most very liberal and progressive areas, and it's been all uniform positive reaction just walking around too. I think the vast majority of people realize that was just part of a smear, and now the people that already didn't care for me might have even been at the Philadelphia Inquirer. It clearly has never really done. So that's where I'm at right now, having this conversation, and then we're going to both end up in D.C. and vote, and we're going to talk about the big beautiful bill, and he'll probably work one way and I'll work a different way. I'm working together, and I haven't missed any of those important votes, and fighting for wins for Pennsylvania, just like the U.S. steel workers are proudly standing and unapologetically standing with Israel. And I refuse to ever shut our government down. And when we have that opportunity in September to do that, I will still be there, and I'll take the beat. I'll take the beating, because that's, I think, what defines leadership.
Okay, we got about 30 seconds left, so Senator McCormick, I'll give you the final word on this.
Well, listen, I didn't know what to expect when I was elected. I went, Senator Fetterman had campaigned a bit against me, but we sat down and we've forged something which I think is great. The same people that elected me elected him for the most part. We've got a lot of overlap. We both care deeply about Pennsylvania. We went out with our spouses for dinner within the first couple months. People were lined up to get Senator Fetterman's autograph, and he looked over me. He sort of felt bad because nobody knew who I was, and he finally said, "Hey, he's a senator too." So we're off to a good start. We have many disagreements, but the thing we both agree on, I think, is that it's an honor to serve Pennsylvania, and we want to work together to do great things together whenever we can.
Well, we thank you both for taking part in this conversation today, and I'll see you back in Washington. As we wrap up here, senators, we're going to have to leave it at that point for today. We do appreciate your time and everybody who was involved in pulling this together here. We'll see you back in D.C. And many thanks to our audience here across the country and around the globe. This debate will be available on demand on Fox Nation. That is it for us from the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate here in Boston. I'm Shana Bream. Have a great day. We'll see you tonight on Special Report, 6 p.m. Eastern on Fox News Channel, and as always, every Fox News Sunday.